This just in, Republican House Speaker Paul Ryan announcing today he is not ready to endorse Donald Trump, the presumptive nominee for the Republican presidential ticket. Ryan's announcement comes as a number of key party leaders say they will not support Mr. Trump, despite RNC Chairman Reince Priebus' call to unite around him. Former President George W. Bush and his father George H.W. Bush also say they have no plans to endorse Mr. Trump or comment on the race going forward. Mitt Romney and John McCain, the GOP's last two presidential nominees, now say they plan to skip the Republican National Convention in July. In an interview this afternoon, Ryan says he is not ready to endorse Trump either. Listen.
You have said throughout this process that you will support the Republican presidential nominee. Now you have a presumptive nominee, Donald Trump. Will you support him?
Well, to be perfectly candid with you, Jake, I'm just not ready to do that at this point. I'm not there right now. And I hope to, though, and I want to. But I think what is required is that we unify this party. And I think the bulk of the burden on unifying the party will have to come from our presumptive nominee. I don't want to underplay what he accomplished. He needs to be congratulated for an enormous accomplishment, for winning not now a plurality of delegates, and he's on his way to winning a majority of delegates. But he also inherited something very special. That's very special to a lot of us. This is the party of Lincoln, of Reagan, of Jack Kemp. And we don't always nominate a Lincoln and a Reagan every 4 years. But we hope that our nominee aspires to be Lincoln and Reagan-esque, that person advances the principles of our party and appeals to a wide, vast majority of Americans.
All right, joining us now, CBS News senior political editor Steve Chaggaris. He's in Washington. Steve, this is a seismic statement from Speaker Ryan.
I mean, it's a big deal. I don't know about seismic. It's definitely a big deal, though, and it goes to show you how much work Trump has to do in the next 74 days before the Republican convention in Cleveland. He has to get Republican leaders on his side, coalesce, and be able to move forward. What Ryan said was actually quite reasonable. He said, I'm not ready yet, but I need Donald Trump to convince me and others in this party that he is ready to be the nominee of this party. And that's really, he was very clear about that. And I think there are a lot of Republicans right now that are giving him the benefit of the doubt for winning, basically winning the nomination and winning this primary season. But it's not just a slam dunk that he's going to walk into the convention and everybody's going to follow Trump. He has a lot of work to do to sit down with people like Ryan and others in the party and really work with them moving forward and to prove to them that he can actually work with them and not just run roughshod through the party from the convention on.
Steve, though, I wonder, and this is coming from somebody who doesn't have as much experience as you do in covering politics, but doesn't this provide cover for other Republicans who may also have been on the fence about supporting Donald Trump? This provides them a little cover to also take the same position that the former presidents Bush have taken, Mitt Romney, et cetera?
On that, I just want to say that to give Trump a little bit of cover himself on this, the Bushes have not gone to the last two conventions. There are plenty of Republicans who skip conventions, especially Republicans who are running in really tough re-election races. So it's not surprising that a guy like McCain, who is up against it this year in his re-election fight, and he said this, he was very, very candid about this. He said, I'm running in a tough re-election fight. I need to worry about getting elected again, so I'm going to stay in Arizona during the convention. This is not an uncommon thing on both sides. You'll have people. I don't think that is a signal of the lack of unity in the party. However, there are other signals that there's a lack of unity within the party, and Paul Ryan was emblematic of that today. And so that should be a warning signal to Trump that what Ryan just said, that he has to get people together, whether it's the donors, whether it's other Republicans who either don't like him or who are on the fence, to sit down with him over the next 74 days and figure out how he can get as many Republicans on board the Donald Trump train, because it is going out of the station, but he doesn't want to leave the station in July after the convention without the party behind him.
Okay, so to that point, Steve, Speaker Ryan says that he may be willing at some point to support or consider supporting Donald Trump. And I guess presumably that would mean if he becomes more presidential, if he's more unifying to the party. But does a leopard change its spots?
Well, that's going to be the big question. Again, there are 2.5 months between now and the convention, and so the question for Trump is: does he change his spots? Does he work with these folks? Does he get all these people on board for a tough general election fight against who's likely to be Hillary Clinton, or does he continue the way he's been going and alienating people not only around the country but within his own party? He's going to have to figure that out himself, and we'll see. But my sense is, he's got to. It's going to become clear over the next 2.5 months whether whether he's going to do this or not, and I think we'll start to see signs of it. I mean, keep in mind, it's been less than 48 hours since he's become the quote presumptive nominee, and he even said, geez, I'm shocked this happened so early. I was expecting to be battling Cruz until June 7th. So he's a month ahead of his schedule at this point. I think we'll start to see in the next few weeks some outreach from Trump, from people who are working closely with Trump, to people in Washington, to elected officials, to people like Paul Ryan, and to Republican donors. And we'll start to see if that actually bears fruit or not. We'll hear what happens in those conversations. We'll hear how that wooing goes. And if we get a sense over the next month that it's not going very well, that's going to be problematic for Trump as he goes into the convention. But right now, to say 2 days after he's become the presumptive nominee that things aren't going to work out for him, it's just, there's no way of knowing. This is really all up to Trump and all up to Trump's people.
Steve, I'm going to play another soundbite from Speaker Ryan's interview with Jake Tapper, but before we do that, I just sort of want to ask you, knowing what we know about Donald Trump and his candidacy and his campaign for the presidency of the United States, I mean, this is speculation, but I wonder, because he knows that he has so many millions of votes. He's, as you've pointed out many times on our air, he has won more popular votes than the last two GOP nominees. Could he say, you know what, I don't need, this is another example of establishment Republicans coming out and saying they don't support me. Well, the people support me, and so I'm not that concerned with what Speaker Ryan does.
He's not running in a primary anymore. He's running in a general election. He needs more than just Republicans voting for him. He needs independents. He needs to pull away some Democrats. The question is he savvy enough to understand that this isn't about the 10 million people that voted for him in the Republican primaries? This is about a much larger pot of voters, a much broader electorate in terms of their views on issues. And so he needs to figure that out. His strategists and his advisors need to teach him that, and if he doesn't get that, then he's going to lose big in November. If he does start to get that, that means he first needs to heal the wounds within his own party, because clearly there are a lot of those, but then he needs to figure out how to reach out to others around the country and campaign to a broader electorate. All we've seen over the last 11 months is him campaigning hard for the Republican nomination. It's a very that's a slice of the electorate. Now he's got to broaden out. He's got to run up against Hillary Clinton and broaden out his appeal, and we'll see how that works out. But first, he's got to get as many Republicans on board as possible.
That's a great point, distinguishing between a primary run and now a general election run. I also want to play, Steve, for you a little bit more of what Paul Ryan said earlier. Take a listen.
No, this one, just to be clear, you're still ruling out in any way you accepting any sort of nomination of your party?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, just want to make sure that. And then lastly, sir, just I guess the question is, what are the odds that he's going to be able to become the candidate you want him to be? You say you have a lot of work to be done, but quite frankly, I've been covering him, I've covered you. Is this chasm bridgeable?
I think it's possible, but this isn't, look, don't say this is about me. This is about we, the Republican Party, we, the conservatives, who want a standard bearer who's going to represent all of the full spectrum of conservatism and unify all factions of the party, but not just that Republicans can be proud of, that Americans can be part of, that can compete for the vast majority of Americans so you can win the election.
All right, Steve, so there are two things there. One, Jake is trying to get Speaker Ryan to say whether or not he'd consider being sort of the standard bearer if it doesn't work out with Donald Trump. The other larger point is the point that you've been making, which is can Donald Trump bridge that chasm between the Republican Party, the establishment Republican Party, I guess, and where he is?
Yeah, to the first question, I think we're done with the open convention speculation. Donald Trump is going to be the nominee of the Republican Party at this point, and to speculate otherwise or try to ask a guy like Paul Ryan, is there going to be some sort of implosion between now and July 18th? I mean, that's just sort of wild, you know, that's just making stuff up at this point. I mean, there's nothing to indicate that Trump is not going to be the nominee at this point. So I think that question is pretty easily dispensed with, as Ryan showed you. On the second part of this, he's right. It isn't about Paul Ryan. It's about Republicans who aren't totally on board with Trump. And what does he do? Again, this was a really bruising primary race. You had 17 people at the start, about a dozen when the voting first started, who had different views of how the Republican Party should move forward. You had people, before this who never thought that Donald Trump could do what he's doing now. And there are a lot of Republicans who, if you asked 3 months ago, 2 months ago, whether Trump could be the nominee of this party, they say there's no way. He doesn't represent what the Republican Party should represent. Okay, well now they're here. Now they're at a point where they're staring Donald Trump in the face as the nominee of the Republican Party, and they've got to figure out how to move forward with that. And what Republicans are saying is, okay, now he's done a lot, we've done a lot, but he's the one now as the standard bearer. He needs to come to us and work with us so he gets all of us on board moving forward.
Steve, one last question, and this comes literally from me being sort of a neophyte to all this, and perhaps a lot of our viewers who may be also
You're not
wondering.
that much of a neophyte. You say that
well, I love politics. I'm a political junkie, but it does, some of the intricacies that happen in Washington are sometimes sort of, you explain something to me, and I go, oh yeah, I get that. And here's the question about Donald Trump and what it means to bring together, to bridge that chasm, as Tapper said. Does that mean that Donald Trump starts to say, well, I don't want to deport Muslims, I don't want to build a wall? I mean, these are the things that many people have, whether you're an independent or Republican, have problems with, right? The idea that you're going to deport millions of Muslims, that you're going to build a wall, that Mexicans are, rapists and they're bringing in drugs to the country. Is that what it means, or does it mean, look, we can work with the establishment to come up with some ideas and some solutions, make sure that Donald Trump is listening to us? Is that all we're talking about, as opposed to changing his policy, some of the things that he said on the campaign trail that he says will be part of his policies?
Yeah, I don't mean to weasel out of the question, but it really depends. No, it just depends on who you ask. So somebody like Paul Ryan, clearly his agenda is to really try to get candidates, presidential candidates and otherwise, to change how they speak to voters. And so I think in the case of Paul Ryan, absolutely he would want to hear Trump change his tone on those kinds of issues. He's trying to broaden the tent. He's trying to bring in more than just old white men into the Republican Party. And how do you do that? You do that and you speak in a more moderate tone, and you speak about issues differently than Republicans have done in the past. There are other Republicans who might want Trump to even go harder conservative on issues. I mean, people who are supporting Ted Cruz probably feel that Trump isn't conservative enough. And so you're going to have that push and pull among different factions of the Republican Party. The question is can Trump sit down with all of them and get a good chunk of them behind him, not only from a financial standpoint, he has to sit down with donors who aren't totally sold on him as well. And he's already said, I'm not going to necessarily self-fund my general election. So he's got to get donors on board to help him out, but also get elected officials, leaders, and people who are running for office, because there are some people who are running for office around this country who are Republicans who might not like the idea that Donald Trump is going to be at the top of the ticket. And so he's got to work as hard as he can over the next 2 months to get as many of those people on board, to have some kind of momentum going into the convention and coming out of the convention, and so the story isn't how the Republican Party is just a complete shambles.
He says he wants to raise $1 billion. We'll see what happens. Steve Chaggaris in Washington. Always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vlad.